very much for joining us on Job Seeker Nation. We are here every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 o'clock Central. We try to bring you the best job information as possible, a little bit of news, a little bit of practitioner equals hopefully a lot of value. If you should have a question, feel free to continue in the chat. And if you want to just ignore us and just pay attention to what's going on in the chat, that's fine too. We're here for you. We're here to bring you all that we can to help make your job search a little bit more bearable. With me this week is Anna Morgan, career BFF, and without me is Jack Kelly, who is on assignment, let's say. So, welcome to the show, Anna. How are you?
I am fantastic. I am sorry Jack can't be here. I am a huge fan and love the work that he does, especially all the amazing things that he writes. And I'm just honored to be here with you today to have a great conversations about the market, about recruiters, and supporting job seekers, because that's the common thread that you and I have. And
Yeah.
we're here to be of service and share our expertise, right?
Right, right. And you, like Jack and like many of our guests, you are a recruiter and you've been doing this for many years now. And of course, you also help job seekers. So you kind of ride the fence on a lot of these things. And this is going to be a very interesting perspective because anytime we get a recruiter on, we want to milk them for their perspective because very often they are on the front lines
Yes.
and sometimes in very precarious situations that the regular folks just don't get to see the chance to see. So we'll pull
Yeah.
back the curtain a little bit and we'll mix it up and we'll see it all happen. Of course, if you guys have any questions, you'll put it in the chat. We'll always be glad to interrupt what we're talking about to talk about what you want to talk about. Let's go ahead and dive in. And this is a subject we dived in before, and every now and then I like to check in to see how what this perspective looks like for you as far as women who have not turned to work beginning of the pandemic, and let's say that many of them got the shaft in many ways because they end up being the ones being home and take care of the children, making it very hard for them to turn back to work. So for you, at this particular time when it's a job seeker market, and you can feel free to share any little secrets that are involved about uh, advice you have for them returning back to work, because some of them had their careers completely, not particularly derailed, but perhaps disrupted.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, disruptive is a perfect word. I think
Mhm.
women have been blindsided by the additional responsibilities and kind of the fallout from the pandemic, as
Mm.
we traditionally have assumed more of the caretaker roles historically. But
Mhm.
I see a lot more balance in those roles today, as you see more stay-at-home fathers, more fathers that work gig opportunities or freelance work, and women are stepping back into corporate roles. For those that have had a break, I mean, one, employers are so much more graceful or accepting of gaps in employment today. And
Mhm.
I say that with a caveat: if the uh, woman can explain or can demonstrate or tell a story about some of the things that they have been doing, because being a CEO of a household is a big responsibility, right?
Sure.
Being able to tell a story around that, but also talking about servant leadership and volunteer opportunities and any courses or continuing education opportunities that they participated in to make sure that they have been able to maintain their skills.
Mhm.
So, if I were in that situation returning to the workforce, LinkedIn is the first place I would go to start connecting with like minded people at target organizations. I would set up as many coffee chats and informational chats as humanly possible to start building that brand awareness around me as a woman looking to transition back into the workforce. There's great groups like Dan Roth's Job Connection Tuesday, where you're connecting recruiters with talent, and then taking advantage of some of the LinkedIn Premium courses that are available as well, because that really gives people confidence when they do get that interview and they can talk about what they have been doing during the time that they've been managing virtual learning and having, a little bit of this gap in their employment. There's other organizations like the Mom Project that really supports women. Fairy Godboss is another website that really caters to women, professional women working either, like I said, in the gig economy or trying to transition back into the workforce. So those are a
Mhm.
few tips off the top of my head.
No, oh, that's good. No, I think when people think that they have to do a job search by themselves, and I think we almost say it here every week, that a tribe to job search with is a whole lot better because you'll have better resources and better access, and also you have resonance
Exactly.
amongst other people, and I think that's pretty important during this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, looking for mentors or coaches, I would, bet that there are probably coaches like myself that maybe specialize in specifically helping women to re-enter the workforce. No one's
Hmm.
coming to mind at the moment, but there are so many great resources like myself and many other coaches that can at least get them started and give them some of those basic tools in their tool belt to
Hmm.
help accelerate opportunities, because as you know, how we look for work is moving fast, and
Yeah.
it has even changed since the very beginning of the pandemic, in my humble opinion. And we'll talk more about that as well.
Yes, yes. And the more specific people are about looking for opportunities, the more opportunities that will present themselves in the job search along the way. If you are targeting companies and you're getting really specific and clear about what you can do, I've seen it time after time on LinkedIn and elsewhere where people are having a lot more success because that way people know how to help you and know
Exactly,
how
because
to
that
give. Yeah.
the clarity sells, right? And building your brand, your personal brand, and this is something that I have had success with throughout my career, not even really knowing that personal branding was a super strength of mine, but
Hmm.
it does build that credibility. And people have to remember that it takes time, right, for
Hmm.
people to like and trust and understand what your focus is, right? And so if you're constantly changing your profile or constantly sharing different content, you're going to confuse your audience. So being more specific is always going to be more profitable or yield better results. And like I said, pre-show is you have to kind of stick around until the miracles happen,
Hmm.
and give as much as you're getting on LinkedIn. And you will be so surprised by the super awesome people that are willing to lift you up, share information, say yes to informational interviews, and support you along your job search journey.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we have a disgruntled male. And hold on, we're not excluding the male. I'm asking a specific question because it's mostly a lot of us men who usually cover the show, Martin. So, Martin Cordello, shout out to you.
Sorry.
We are not ignoring you. We're getting the focus first. We're going to get to the men, and it is a universal question. And a lot of this advice, honestly, does apply to men as well. You
Oh,
want to have a tribe.
100%.
Yeah, you
Hmm.
want to have a tribe. You want to connect with other people in general. And, some women just feel comfortable talking about women. And I think some women who are career coaches gear only to women. I want to
Hmm.
ask the women this question because they have been the hardest hit in the economy. If you look at the statistics, men have had the most opportunities. So that is definitely not a slight, Martin, and I hope you stick around for that. But let's I do want to concentrate a little bit on women just for another second, and talk a little bit about some of their disadvantages, especially for networking, because they have children, they have lesser opportunities to network and to be as outgoing. Plus the pandemic, depending where you live, those opportunities aren't readily available and put in front of you like it's put in front of men because of their ability and the mobility to be out and about. That is, if they're not taking care of children too, because I used to be the one that took the jobs where it had to be flexible so I could pick up the kids and drop
Mhm.
them off and do the homework and do the dinner. I did that
Yeah.
myself, so I can relate to the male side and men who have to do that. So for the women, I know they have the extra challenge because of the social pressures to do that. And you can go ahead and take the
Yeah,
horn.
I mean, I was just going to say, I mean, it really comes down to like time management, right? And this
Sure.
is where some of the skills of being a stay-at-home mom or a single parent where you're managing schedules and carpool and pickup and volunteerism, and it really comes down to being vigilant about time blocking, in my professional
Hmm.
opinion. I mean, I'm very ADHD and I have successfully managed working almost full-time hours and coaching for 2 years. But
Hmm.
I've only been able to do that because I am vigilant about my scheduling. And first and foremost, I have to take care of me, which is why
Right.
I focus on fabulous self love and self care in my coaching programs. Because if we aren't taking care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to be the best parents, the best future employees, etc. Right?
Right.
So it comes down to organizing your life that you can stick to, right?
Yeah.
And then finding those little pockets of time. And I told a new client this morning that I'm onboarding, she works, right? She works a
Hmm.
full-time job. So, we talked about different ways. I said it might look like just getting up an extra 30 minutes to sit at your computer and have some intentional LinkedIn time, right?
Yeah.
To add connections, engage, set your target companies, etc.
Hmm.
And it really comes down to that vigilance and people's values about themselves, right? Do they
Hmm.
really feel like they're valuable enough to make this time, right? And then
Right.
when we take control of our schedule, you have more confidence. You have boundaries. And that's another area that I think women and job seekers struggle with, is that, oh, somebody wants me, let me jump over to that, well, I'm going to do this, and it's very reactionary, right? But if
Yeah.
you're focused on your schedule and have intentional job search strategy or LinkedIn time to build your brand, have those coffee chats, and you have to be vigilant and say, I'm only available for coffee chats on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 to 2:30, and then I have to go pick up my children. That's one way that I would start to
Right.
find the time to start networking and be available. And then sometimes it's also, asking for help from your, spouse or your partner or neighborhood friends or a family that can, be available consistently so you can put that time into you,
Yeah.
whether that's self care or job search strategy focus. So,
Yeah, and I completely agree and have seen a lot of that. I believe that it's important that you have to be willing to do all that attracts the fish, so to speak,
mhm,
in order for you seem attractive. It's not just important for you to be attractive. You are what you seem, uh, so to speak. So if people see that you're really let's say tech savvy and that you're fluid in the way that you present yourself online, then you're
mhm.
going to attract more. If you're not fluid and you're always complaining about uh, internet problems and software problems and asking people all the time how to do it publicly, then of course you're not going to be as attractive than somebody who moves very quickly because people want to do as less training as they possibly can.
Mhm.
Employers, they
And I
so
also
they want
think,
somebody who's attractive in
yeah,
that way. Go ahead.
for job seekers in general, men or women, I mean, that's the power of having a optimized LinkedIn profile that is
Hmm.
clear, concise, tells a great story, complements your resume, is hook worthy, draws people in to take action, to want
Hmm.
to get to know you better. And
Right.
that's where it starts. And then, it mushrooms into community building, engagement, and giving to others to be able to
Hmm.
have earned the right to ask for certain things.
Absolutely. I want to give a shout out to a couple of people, a few people who are watching us and saying hi.
Sebastian
Susan,
says to
thank you,
drink
Reddit.
slowly.
Yes, right. Martin Shillette, I believe that's how you pronounce it, Shillette. Hey.
Yes, Shalette
And
is a past client of mine, and she's a big fan of yours. And
oh,
anyone that's in
okay,
the comments, follow her. She's been putting up some amazing content,
good deal.
sharing kind of her job search journey. And she's an HR compliance and recruiting consultant looking for roles here in Atlanta.
Oh, very nice. And
Yeah.
here, Shalette says it's important to solidify your expertise to be attractive to employers. Definitely, you've got to show your work. And that's an area I think when we come back, and I'm going to go back to Martin. Comment he says below here. He says older men and women have been hit hard. Yes, since the pandemic, that's correct. In fact, that's one of the other hard hit, um, demographic. That's the word I'm
Hmm.
trying to use, is that older people have been forced to retire and
Yes.
retire a whole lot quicker than they ever had. I'll even say that my wife decided to retire October 31st of last year of 2020 during the pandemic because, you think about it, women and men who are left at the job are the ones that are kind of the low hanging fruit.
Hmm.
Especially when it comes to trying to get work done. But also, a lot of them ended up having to retire because then they're the ones to overcompensate for all the young people leaving the job and then is reliant on them, then it becomes impossible to manage for anybody, but
Hmm.
particularly for them, and especially when it comes to technological things, they said, hey, I need a little bit more time here. And if they don't get that cooperation and they don't have the boss who's empathetic, who's really applying true leadership value and principles and strategy, then they decide that it's time for me to go. This is no longer a game that I can play. So yes, they've been hit very hard to make it in the industry, no matter the industry. But I imagine that we got to look at the hospitality, the travel, and the resource management first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all know that ageism has been a problem pre-pandemic and
Hmm.
age discrimination. However, because I see corporations struggling to fill some of their roles that they used to be able to fill pretty easily, I'm
Hmm.
seeing that decision makers and hiring managers are being a little more willing to consider more experienced candidates to and be more willing to offer some of that training. If say they're not very good with Excel, then we'll put
Hmm.
them in Excel class. Or if they need some sales leadership training, then we can explore that. We know they can sell, they know they understand the product or the service.
Hmm.
But again, I think that goes back to networking, right?
Yeah.
Having champions within organizations that really can help overcome that bias and really
Hmm.
focus on the talent as a human and the impact and the transformation that they can potentially provide for the economy.
Hmm.
And I anticipate that we'll see more freelance opportunities. The gig economy is going to continue to expand, which hopefully will open more opportunities for some of our beloved, older talent. And, I feel awkward saying that because I'm coming up on being 50. And, when you're, well,
Oh.
not really. I
Yeah.
just turned 47. I had a birthday like last week. So,
Oh. Yeah,
but
yeah, okay. You're
okay,
talking to
when you're
somebody who's
there, you're like,
61,
I'm
so
not
you know.
old. Like I used to think when my mom was 40, I was like, that's old. And now I'm like,
Well, it's a
life is just
perspective.
beginning.
It's perspective. I'm 61, so you're talking to
No.
somebody. Yes, I am. I'm 61, and you're talking to somebody that been in the game quite a long time. So when I hear people say that I'm coming up on 50, but I'm really 37, you're like, oh yeah, okay. You're really coming up on driving a car, but you just got your training wheels on. And it depends on perspective. But go ahead. I'm
Exactly.
sorry.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it is just a perspective, but I feel like with this great resignation and the great awakening that, that's having some ripple effect to cause leaders at the boardroom tables, to consider how can we do hiring differently? How can we access talent, whether it be much greener, younger talent to help backfill these positions that
Hmm.
Gen X and boomers and traditionalists are exiting. What kind of training programs can we put in to develop and retain talent as they come through, or access more senior talent to help with special projects or part-time work? Like, I would love to see corporations be more open to part-time work
Hmm.
for more experienced people. I think that would solve both problems between, older talent that wants to work and women or people rejoining the workforce that kind of want to ease their way into things, right?
Right, right, absolutely. So, secret number one, you've got to tell us. You know all the big discussion we've had over the past couple of weeks, and you know why. I'm not going to go down the road completely, but salary negotiations become a really huge discussion these days. And a question I would have to ask for those of us who are in the more senior part of our lives, or as my friend Mark Miller would say, we're in the second half of life, if you will, is
Right.
that being that if companies are willing to look at, and it's always the process. Nobody says, "Well, we hired a bunch of seniors." You ever hear the language,
I'm pretty
"We've
sure that's
already
not in their
hired,"
like diversity
you know,
metrics like some of the other metrics.
and right, and we could go down that road too. But all in all, and we can. But right now we're going to stick to the older workers. Is that also that they pair is that they pay a very fair wage to older workers. And I'm not sure if I should say that according to their life experience, because that would be kind of unfair to kind of to get into. But
Mhm.
just that it's a pay fair to what the job has called for. What are some of the things that you're seeing as far as how that seniors, or what should seniors, how should they position themselves so that they're also paid in a fair way or equal? Because they're not just taking over the leftovers, they're taking over a whole job. So, and I think that's part of the challenge in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to put a price tag based on years of experience, essentially,
Yes, it is.
because
Yeah.
you're not guaranteed that's quality output, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think right now compensation is going through a huge overhaul. I
Yeah.
My heart goes out to all of the comp analysts and the comp leaders right now,
Hmm.
trying to keep up with the changing demands in the market. Amazon increased their base pays for their current employees to help keep them and not, risk them getting recruited out. That's correct, right? I read
Hmm.
that,
Right.
right?
Right.
And then you have inflation. I'm seeing that in my grocery bills right now and other areas. So I think for I think for all job seekers, it's important to talk about money early and often. And as a
Okay.
recruiter, I stand firm in that stance. If you are in a couple conversations with a recruiter and you have zero idea what the compensation is, you have missed a step in that process.
I
And
agree. I agree.
we recruiters are typically given a pay band that has been budgeted from the department or the hiring manager. So we should know that when we're talking to talent. And if your recruiter doesn't know that, make them find out because if they
Or
want to
run.
present you, then we mutually want to determine that this role, is in the ballpark, right? You don't have to agree to it right away. Oftentimes, if you're at the beginning of an interview process, it's not till the third or fourth interview that you can really evaluate the responsibilities in comparison to the compensation.
And I've had this argument with somebody that I don't know if you know them, but one of the things I suggested is that a lot of recruiters, they want to know upfront what your salary expectations are. And I think it's also a fair question. I said, well, I'm expecting this range. Does this range fall into what the salary is? A lot of them would say, I don't know. And I've suggested run run. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean,
run. And I think that, because that's the beginning sometimes at the end. Now you've got to be a little bit savvy, and you've got to have your ear to the ground, and you also have to do the research that's involved. So if you're looking at the market rate, you should be looking what is like state, region, all that, because there are different rules for different companies, and there's also state laws that show in
true.
compliance. We talked about in the past couple of weeks how New York, starting I guess in March or April, that they have to show the range. But if you listen to Jack brought up a good point in one of his recent videos, not on the show, that they're going to play a game. They're going to give a range of, well, the positions between 85 and 250,000. It was like, okay, I get it. They're going to play the game, but at the
Right.
same time, that the ones that are willing to differentiate between the ones that will and won't be transparent, and the
Hmm.
ones that will give them, it's sort of, we're playing Parcheesi in a lot of ways. The player that won't tip their hands the first is going to win. But
Exactly.
I really feel like, maybe you could give some insight here, especially for the older workers who are going to be most vulnerable, and for women who are
Hmm.
also historically paid less than men, depending upon what racial ethnic group that you come from. The
Hmm.
disparities are greatly there as well. So how to have that conversation? What are maybe one or two other tips that you might be able to provide when somebody's talking to a recruiter, or maybe just talking to the employer, about where to go with this conversation?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, typically the process starts with initial phone screen or, Zoom meeting to review the resume, talk about the background, and mutually determine if the role, hits the job seeker's career goals and pulls the
Hmm.
levers of what the hiring manager is looking for, right?
Hmm.
And so once you get through that conversation, I typically think that's a good time to talk about compensation. And typically my strategy is I'll say, for this position, the range is 75 to 110 with a 10% bonus. Then I typically review some of our benefits because total comp really matters right now,
Yes, it
uh,
does.
whether it's remote or hybrid or whatever those things are. And then I typically say, does that fall within the range that you're comfortable with? Because
Hmm.
I don't like to ask, and I work with talent across the nation, and I know there are different laws that you can't ask, like you had mentioned.
Like history, you
And
can't
then
ask, right?
I give them first right of refusal to say, well,
Hmm.
actually, I'm making quite a bit more than that. And if they want to go further in the conversation, I will listen. But then, I can say, well, I'd be willing to push with the hiring manager if we're not off by too much as we
Hmm.
go through the process. But, for me as a recruiter, to ensure that things don't fall apart after the fifth or sixth interview, I'm always
Hmm.
talking about money each time I talk to my talent to make sure as they're going through the process that they still feel the comp is in line with the responsibilities.
That is very important. I'm glad you said that, and if you don't mind, I will stop you right
Sure.
there too, because the asking at the beginning and asking like near the end, that salary range and expectations now have changed because I have more data. I have
Right.
more information to rely on. Say, I'm gonna be doing this instead of this. Well, that is a little that changes the range. Sometimes it might fall wide because you might have enough intel to go off, and you might have talked to that former worker in that position and said, okay, we kind of got the range, we kind of got it. And that's definitely something that with LinkedIn, you can do that. You can go and
Absolutely.
find the person that used to be in that role, even if it was just 2 or 3 years ago or 5 years ago, and say, hey, this is what I understand to be what pieces am I missing, and ask, hey, if you're afraid to ask, what did you get paid? Ask, and this is, I got this from Hannah
You just
Morgan,
flip
which is
it and
really good.
say,
You just say,
I'm
well, how
talking,
much?
this is the range that they have said. Does that sound right based on your experience working with a company?
Or yeah, or even ask a even more passive, direct question is, how much is that position going for these days? Do you know? And
Perfect.
that person, and then that way that person could either chime in, or they'll give a roundabout number based on their experience. But you'll have a whole lot more intel than going into it. And I know it's different between, and let's talk about this because I love this discussion. Let's say it's not, I don't know, you probably dealing with more professional positions and not particularly like the hourly worker positions, if I'm assuming correctly.
I
Right?
mean,
Is
I've
that
done
right?
everything. I mean, I
Okay.
work like some corporations still have hourly workers up to 65,000 a year. So
Yes.
I do
And
work with
let's
hourly.
let's talk about that, because that's also a challenge. And people who've been hit, and they face it. Some face the challenge of they're the hourly with benefits, and then they're hourly without benefits.
Mhm.
And the ones without benefits very often struggle. As when I worked hourly once upon a time, long ago, far away, I did ask the question. Even when I worked, I said, "Hey, I'm doing this, that, and the other. Can we look at bumping up the pay a little bit?" And I forgot exactly how I asked in one situation,
Mhm.
but there was another situation where I asked, and and I knew that the company was going to close soon.
Mm.
That was the kicker. So if you have some inside intel as to the company, and people are starting to exit and you're staying, that's a time to get a little bump in pay, because there, the forget the next job, the new ceiling becomes the floor, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
Eh, Go ahead.
I mean, there's so many ideas swirling around this, but I wanted to go back to, early conversations about
Okay.
compensation, because here's
Okay.
the other thing is that most job descriptions are not well written, right? So how can we
Yes.
evaluate one call and a job description and decide on what our worth is for that potential position?
Hmm.
So that's the other value of, building the relationship with your recruiter, building that trust, some transparency,
Hmm.
communicating effectively. This is why I coach to the recruiter behind the curtain concepts, so that when you get towards the end of the process, you have some negotiating ability and you have data points to support why, if you were to accept this offer, your requirement would be this. Because once managers start interviewing, they start talking about their pain points, what keeps them up at night, what characteristics on their team that they're looking to replicate, what has made those people successful. And if you have those things, ding, 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 those
Right.
are your selling points to drive home to increase your compensation and get that
Yes.
offer that aligns with your
Yes.
worth.
Yes, and it's very important too that a lot of people will focus just on a monetary part, when also the other parts of the package,
Give
talk
me an
about
extra
total
week
cover.
of
It,
vacation
it,
all day
yeah,
long.
extra week of vacation, sick leave, family leave, parental leave. You
Stock.
could stock,
Yep.
insurance.
Hmm.
There's so many other different parts of it that a lot of people just focus in on. But the message, I think, is being sent, and I think I talked about it last week with Kirsten Greggs, who's also a recruiter.
Hmm.
My buddy, we've talked in great length about this. Is, if you are a, I'm gonna re calibrate this question or my comment, because context matter. Is that you have the it depends, because hourly workers very often don't get the same compensation offerings and allotment than, let's say, their white collar workers do. That's one distinction, because very often they get a higher rate, they get more vacation per year, per se, And very often, if you've been with the company, that also is a part of it. But there's also the fact that there are laws that are there that exist for parental leave and family leave, that in some states and some cities, just like salary, that have certain attachment to it, that might be available, but
Mhm.
sometimes the company may omit that bit of information. So that's why it's kind of important for everybody to do the due diligence across the board and come
Mhm.
more informed to the negotiation table with all that you possibly can, and not just a bunch of numbers and what the bottom line is going to be for your check for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people get a little like intimidated by the hourly concept. And,
Yeah,
that's a bit of a rabbit hole we can go down to. But corporations
yeah,
now, I believe the reason that they do this, and G, who's in the comments, pipe in with your HR knowledge, but a lot of times they will have non-exempt positions, which are
hmm,
hourly, to help like prevent unhealthy work-life balance, right? To make sure
right,
that people are getting paid time and a half if they are working over 40 hours, and just kind of reel in the hours expectation, because I've been salary before, and sometimes you
hmm,
look at the number of hours that you're putting in and then you break it down and you're like, well, if I were an hourly worker, I'd only be making this much. But it's just important to prepare and have questions to ask depending on the different types of recruiters, talent acquisition professionals, and hiring managers that you're engaging with. And then
yeah.
being really vigilant about documenting that process so that you have all your data when you get to making a decision.
Yep. I want to address a question here I think is very important because we're talking about also as part of the theme here, we're talking about how to present yourself and how to speak up for yourself. And Susan asked a very interesting question here. I don't want to let this go because I think this is relative to everything that we're talking about, especially when it comes to advocating yourself. She asked, what happens when people don't have a bachelor degree and have 5 years of experience? How well do they sell to managers? Now, that's a very broad question, Susan, and there's like several ways to answer that, and it's impossible to have a self contained. However, if we added a little context, let's say you have 5 years industry experience, or let's narrow it down, let's juice it up. You have 5 years experience in the specific position that you're applying to, how well that sells to managers. Well, 5 years is often the magic number, right? Five
Yeah,
years
they
being
sometimes think it's either a bachelor's degree or equivalent to 5 years cumulative experience
right,
in the industry or in a similar position title.
right,
So, I mean, I'm seeing employers be much more relaxed around degree requirements because how we learn things has evolved so
yeah,
dramatically between boot camps and YouTube and continuing education and courses that, depending on the industry, the weight of the traditional degree
hmm,
is changing, in my opinion.
yeah. I think so too, and especially I know we see a lot of it in tech. That'll be the
Mhm.
first area that you know those of us who do career speak, if you will. That's the first thing. Well, the tech industry is doing this. How about everybody else? Well, that's an
Right.
interesting question. I've written some articles kind of exploring some of the other industries like manufacturing. That
Mhm.
becomes it depends on what position. If you're
Mhm.
talking about working on the floor, it's a little bit different. It's a lot different because a lot of the places are unionized and a lot of them aren't. So there's going to be disparity, and
Mhm.
you is in a lot of ways you're going to be comparing orange and apples. But
Right.
if we would give the Amazon answer too, that becomes another thing because there if you have one of those professional positions, you got doubled your salary. If you were one of those hourly positions working in the warehouse, then you just got $3 an hour bump. Which we
Mhm.
could say, well, they got a bump. They should be glad to get what they get. Yeah, But
But
if you're looking, yeah, we are comparing apples, but again, we're talking about the way you treat human beings. What message do you actually send in all that? But all that to say is that, yeah, that should also inform you. Okay, then I don't want to be an Amazon worker because they don't put the value in the same way they do in other employees. Is that a fair assessment to for somebody
I
who's
mean,
a job
I
seeker
can't speak
understand?
to the Amazon experience, but I
Right,
mean,
but in essence, the employer experience, where it's obvious that one is seemingly more valued than the other
right.
part of the workforce.
Yes, 100%. And it really comes down to an equity, value of the organization,
Absolutely.
and a really in a people over everything kind of mindset, right?
Hmm.
Are Is it really important to us to retain and our employees our number one asset, or
Hmm.
are we looking at profit over everything else, right?
Right.
And that's the question that those at the top need to look in the mirror and start answering those questions, because with what we're experiencing in the market right now, we have talent that's struggling to find opportunities. We have hiring managers that are whining and jumping up and down about why talent teams can't find talent.
Hmm.
And there's this disconnect. And part of it comes down to, even something like Susan said, how do we sell ourselves when, core traditional job descriptions say one thing,
Hmm.
and it's all about telling your story, right? And
Yes.
this is where the interview coaching comes into play. It's sales. We've got to sell it. We have to tell that story, to break down those objections and help them see the true brilliance and potential of talent and the impact that they can make on organizations. I didn't see Shilette's question. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll go back to Shailette's question because Martin had a relative a relevant question or comment. He says, as hiring manager for 35 years of my life, the early degrees didn't have as much influence on my hiring experience than later degrees with experience. I think that is to a certain degree still is still true. That in so a lot of the industries that the talent and the experience weighs a lot heavier than the experience, because a lot of times the bachelor degrees are going off a set criteria of what they teach. So
Mhm.
they might be behind as far as when it comes to technology as a person, somebody who got the right specific certification for that particular job is going to be more relevant than the person who just got the 4-year degree. And the last thing they know is based on what the teacher knew 3 or 4 years ago, not what they know right now. So I think that disparity does
Yeah.
happen. So,
Martin,
so go ahead on that.
congratulations on your accomplishments. That speaks volumes and is a
Hmm.
fantastic story to tell. And as a leader, just adding that educational experience to your years of experience, hopefully is positioning you well to have some productive conversations. So, congrats on that.
Absolutely. Yes, let's go to Shalette's question. Says, what is the most common mistake job seekers make when interfacing with recruiters? We talked about what people should do. What are some of the obstacles and some of the stumbling blocks that most people have? And I think one of them is being educated about what the role of a recruiter is. Well, you can go ahead and
Well,
start
and
wherever you want.
I've been talking about how to work with recruiters, consistently on LinkedIn for about 2
Hmm.
years, and I'm
Yeah.
so glad to start seeing more content around this, because
Hmm.
it is complex. And when you're a job seeker, and depending on your experience, if you've hired, if you haven't, it can be overwhelming with the different types of recruiters between corporate, agency, retained, contingency, outplacement. They all work a little bit differently. How you
Hmm.
engage, how you manage those recruiters, how you evaluate those recruiters and decide to work with them matters. But to Shalette's question, which was, what are some of the common mistakes that job
Mistakes.
seekers make with recruiters?
Hmm.
Is they tend to think in this singular mindset that the recruiter has only spoken to them. And so I'll give
Yeah.
you an example. Oftentimes I get follow up emails that say, Anna, it was great to speak with you on Monday, February 14th. I'm looking to find out next steps. So what
Mhm.
are they missing? They're missing the position, mentioning the position that we spoke about, and any key things they took away from our conversation. And that
Mhm.
happens literally 3 to 5 times a week.
Yeah.
So if talent can just remind the recruiter when they spoke, what position they spoke about, reframing why they're interested, what they think they can bring to the table, and you're looking forward to hearing next steps. Or I remember based at the close of our call that you said I should expect to hear from so and so, on through the process. That grounds the recruiter to go, okay, I'm working
Mhm.
30 positions. Yes, we talked about this position. Let me go check my email or the system to see if I have an update for that candidate. So
Yeah.
that's a really simple one. But because I see these messages consistently,
Mhm.
just reframing the experience so the recruiter can connect the dots. And then we're making it easy for the recruiter to respond to you. And then
Yeah.
you're
Now,
also building that relationship.
I think as well, job seekers forget they're competing for jobs. It's not and it's not like Miss America. You look great for this competition, and that's fine. But that's not the only part of the competition. You also got to sing and dance and answer questions. I mean, all that to say is that job seekers forget there are probably 100 folks that they're competing with. Whether they made the to interviews, that's arguable. They're only going to get, if out of 100, probably 3 or 4 are going to get chosen. If there are a couple of hundred, that number will double, and so on and so, or maybe not. But I think too is that recruiters have to be pretty judicious on how they answer the competition question overall. But I do think that if you understand the competition, which you can learn a lot on LinkedIn about, is that you'll be better prepared on what you need to bring to the party, and how much you really need to step up your game, or is your what you know worthy of presenting yourself in that position anyway.
Yeah, 100%, Martin. The devil's in the details, right?
Yes.
And I think also going back to, I mean, it's the communication style.
Yeah.
And then I think a lot of job seekers have experiences with recruiters that almost feel like an automated attendant, right? Where
Hmm.
they're like, press 1 to talk about this opportunity, press 3 to explain your past 3 years of experience. And they don't really get into really building that relationship. Now, some recruiters and HR people, can be like ice kings and queens and be very reserved and having, more feel good conversations. But I would
Hmm.
say I've worked with enough recruiters over my 20-year career that most of us really want to get to know you and build that relationship and sprinkle in different stories about you and your life and your work experience to help you land in that recruiter's mind. So if this particular role doesn't work out, you're kind of imprinted in their brain for future opportunities. Because one thing recruiters hate is we don't like starting over. We want to work with the talent that we've already spoken with. So it is
Sure.
in your best interest as a recruiter to keep following up and keep trying to build that relationship instead of
Hmm.
trying to like just shut your laptop and go look for something else. Work the warm leads that you already have some momentum with. And don't be, I mean, people get worried about stalking or being too much. It takes one person to change your life. And what's the worst thing that they can do is just block you on their email or block you on LinkedIn. I mean, it shows that you're committed and that you're interested, but it also has to be in the language that is collaborative and makes it easy for the recruiter to respond and be of service to the job seeker.
Yeah, and as I think about it, I want to go back to older workers for a second. I'm going to make a couple of statements, and not particularly. You could chime in afterwards, but I think older workers need to look at what the younger generations of millennials and Gen Zs are doing as far as the spirit in which they approach employers and recruiters. One big difference I see in I saw it last recession, the Great Recession, and I
In
see it
2008.
now. Yeah, right. is how, not just, again, this is approaching recruiters and employers to make sure that you're in the learning mode and not in I've got all the answers mode. I think that makes a big difference in the way that you're being perceived. And very often, uh, Gen Z are talking about personal development and developing. And
Mhm.
one of the reasons why they're leaving jobs, because, or they're job hopping, and they're hopping to the every time, you can almost assume safely the minimum 10% is they've job hopped 3 times in the last 3 years. They're making 30% more than they did 3 years ago. That's
Mhm.
better than the older worker, and I'm talking you, Gen X and baby boomer. I'm a baby
Right.
boomer, so I'm
Yeah,
talking to my
exactly.
generation, that we're used to waiting for the 2 and 3 and maybe the magical 5% jump that we'll get for good behavior and great performance and walking on water. You got to ask yourself, okay, which one is going to make a lot more sense? That they're learning along the way and learning the things that you're waiting for the company to kind of save you mentality, and you may get the 5%, but the Gen Z has already learned 3 times as much because they jumped, and they got 30% more money than they did. They may not have made as much as you now. We can argue that too if you want,
Right.
but but all in all, I'm saying is that their spirit is they come from I want to learn. And really, as an older worker, you should have even more of the curiosity because that's kind of got you where you were once upon a time, right?
Yeah,
So I
absolutely. It's
think
kind of,
so. I think that's the position. If you want to really get a headway, that's one of the things you can start to implement. Look at Gen Z, see what they're doing and how they're doing it, and then imitate that. Maybe we don't have to talk about job hopping, but we do need to talk about the personal development, the learning spirit that I need to absorb whatever I can to add value.
yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like the grasshopper uh, trainee becomes the
Right.
teacher,
You grab
right?
quarter from my hand, right?
Right. And
Yep.
so, I tend to work with late Xers and early boomers that are
Hmm.
like, I'm out of date with modern day career strategies, whether that's networking more effectively within my organization, leveling up with some skills training, or, making some moves.
Hmm.
Because most of us were raised in an era where, my father worked for Ford, and he started in
Hmm.
the parts department and worked his way up to owning multiple dealerships. And that
Hmm.
was his entire career. My grandfather started out of the military, out of the University of Michigan, to work with Life of Georgia, and he was there his entire career. So,
Yeah.
we have been conditioned in this mindset that it's loyalty, it's stability. We're going to be rewarded if we stick around. um,
Hmm.
I think this pandemic has lit a little fire under some of the more experienced professionals to say, okay, one, I realize that I need to build my personal brand and build my LinkedIn visibility a little bit better, because also it's a matter of, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when the rug gets
Right.
pulled out from underneath us, right?
Hmm.
And we always need to be consistently leveling up those skills so that we have options if we need them, right?
Yeah. Right.
Um, so I am seeing, more late Xers, early boomers, traditionalists get more curious about how they can, you know, embody some of that curiosity and mindset of some of these younger generations that are making big moves and big waves right now.
Hmm. Yeah. And we have this. We have
Yes,
the phone.
which I didn't.
This is
I started recruiting faxing resumes, so that
Yeah,
gives me some
right.
perspective.
Well, who didn't fax? Believe it or not, there are people who still there are companies that are still faxing, uh, which is quite
You
funny.
used to,
My
door knock and drop your resume off at all the
y-
different receptionists in a
yes,
one major
yeah.
complex.
You can't. In other words, you can't go up to a company in the front desk and sell yourself into a position. That doesn't work anymore. In case You were thinking
People
it.
didn't.
But all in all, but all in all, though, I think though you can be bold and take that same spirit if you have that, and take that about learning, and not talk about that. I want to learn. So I went on YouTube and learned this. I
Mhm.
went to an Udemy class for $10. When I tell the cost, but everybody knows $10 or $15, whatever it is now. I got the Udemy app on my phone. I went, or even yet, you learn by doing. So well, I have a YouTube channel where I do these things and show people how to do them. Right
Yeah.
there is showing them, show your work, show,
Mhm.
prove. Just don't, you can't, and that's a big difference between Gen Z and older workers as well, and millennials. They can prove that
Yeah,
they've
so
done
if
these
they take a
things.
course in Tableau, like Shalette's profile is awesome, by the way. Like she has studied Tableau and it's how she
Mhm.
can use it in recruiting and talent acquisition. And so
Right.
she has built case models and featured them in her featured section to give social
See,
proof
and
that
that's
she knows what she's doing. And it's a great conversation starter when she's interviewing as well.
yes. Yes. And in just in running business for me and showing, what I write about. Now, I'm not in the coaching, in the coaching and writing resume sphere, but I do a lot of other things, and I show what I want people to learn. So when they come to me, they know exactly what I'm asking, unless you're spamming and you're asking me, so I want to learn more what to do. I've got a whole LinkedIn page to say what I do. I don't have to. You're
Yeah.
fake. So
Yeah.
all that to say is that, yeah, you show your proof, show that you have done it. Don't show about what you can learn to do. Show, and it's up to you to kind of to get ahead in the game that way. So
Mhm.
I know that we're coming up on 4 minutes along the hour.
Wow, that
And
has
Charles,
flown by.
yes, because we had great comments, great and great conversations. And feel free to connect with each other, by the way, not
Yes,
just
yes,
with
definitely
us.
network.
Feel free to follow us, but connect with each other, because I'm sure you've learned from each other. So I think a lot of those questions, but I think a lot of it is too, is that you could tell what people are willing to do by the questions that they ask. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Mhm.
And your questions, and a lot of times when you go to present yourself before employers, a lot of times what you ask about and the way you present yourself is all in the way that you could possibly make it to those next rounds. So consider
100%.
that.
And
Yeah.
that's one thing that I think job seekers don't realize is that their interactions, their profile, their how well their resume is put together, those are the very first steps of your statement of work of
Yep.
what you could potentially do. So whether recruiters are conscious of that, they are evaluating right that like
Mhm.
can they follow the directions, are did they get lost on a Teams call? Like, why was that so difficult? Did they test it beforehand? All those little micro experiences
Yep.
definitely are ding, 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 adding up when the recruiter goes to present you to the hiring manager or to the client. So, just dotting those I's, crossing the T's, asking good questions is one of my favorite parts of recruiting,
Yep.
because it really gives me insight into how their brain works. It also tells me potentially how much preparation they did in advance for the call that they had with the recruiter. And I also
Right.
think job seekers tend to not prepare as much when they are speaking with recruiters. They're like, oh, it's just a recruiter. Like, I'm just gonna, walk through my resume, right?
Yep.
But the rock star candidates are the ones that are looking at the press releases, looking at the company LinkedIn page, asking questions about the job description, about the culture, about the recruiter. Why do they love working there? Things like that.
Yep. And I think it's important too to also, in that same spirit, the idea of, I think one thing that older workers need to learn from Gen Z and millennials, they focus on what they've learned. A lot of times, older folks, we tend to rely on how long we've been doing something, and how
Yes.
long you've been doing something. does
I've
not
been in the
speak to
industry
how,
forever, so therefore I can
yes,
do the job. And I'm
and
like,
and and that says everything and nothing about what the recruiter needs to know about you. That's something you need to, and that's why I said presenting yourself is going to make all the difference in the world in what you say, because for some recruiters, I know a couple, I've worked with a couple here on the show, that years of experience is a trigger for them. So when you say 25, oh gosh, no, and they start to cover the eyes and start to, feel queasy, as
right,
opposed to say, I've been able to do X, Y, and Z in my career, and knowing that it solves a problem for an
yes,
employer, that's what your focus should be more molded around in
right.
presenting
And
yourself, especially online.
to me, it just goes right back to sales, right? Because,
Yes.
I'm thinking about what is the hiring manager's pain point? Why is the position open? What can the
Hmm.
candidate do to solve and improve the current situation, right?
Right.
So,
Yep.
what a fantastic conversation, Mark. I
Yes.
will come back anytime. This has been so much
Oh,
fun.
we're gonna have you back when Jack is around, because I love having two recruiters kind of give their perspective,
Yeah,
and
he and I could talk forever as
but
well.
I think this was very educational. Get you out of here. Anna, what is the one thing you want people to know that you've got coming up? This is your chance, your 30-second brag time. Go.
Yeah. So right now I am just taking on one-on-one clients. It's a 7-week container, one-on-one with me, 60 minutes each week. We set goals, we address mindset, clarity. I optimize your LinkedIn profile, teach you how to, leverage LinkedIn, as well as your resume, finessing that and fixing it up. Interview prep, which is very much a strength of mine, and then really helping teach them how to hone in on those targets, build those relationships, get that social proof, so that they have options. So for me, that is the most available option that I have to talent. And I work with men and women, and
Mhm.
typically. I can work with really anyone because I've been a generalist all my career. So, as a
Okay.
recruiter, that's pretty unique. So, I
Yeah.
can hang with recent grads and executives as well. So,
Awesome. Great info. Thank you so much for joining me
yeah, thank
here.
you.
You were willing to do it even when Jack is not here, and that's even more fun. We
No,
had so
I
much
have
fun.
been
I
wanting
like.
to be able to spend some time with you. So, thank you so much for reaching out.
Well, and thank you very much for spending time with me. I'm going to have you on the Friday show at some particular point. So I'll be contacting you about
Yeah,
that at some
absolutely.
point.
And
But join me Friday on the Modern Job Search Checklist with Jamie and Burkle. We got a really hot topic on Friday. Check us out, same time, same kind of the same dynamic. We're more of the practitioner part of what I do, and actually he does more than I do as far as practitionership. But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us in Job Seeker Nation. Be sure you get hit up on the YouTube channel and hit Anna up for services, and peace and the value of love. We're out for now.